Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me today. There's a couple of topics I want to cover at the top, and then I'll be happy to go right into questions. First, obviously, we want to reflect on the fact that the president came last week and celebrated his first 100 days in office. I do think the historic moment of having a female vice president and a female Speaker of the House spoke volumes in a visual way that of how far our country is continuing to move forward to make sure that it really is a country that offers equality of opportunity for everyone. And I think also the president did a good job last week. We have made remarkable progress on COVID. I was at a testing site in Prince William County, eastern Prince William County, on Saturday. It looked like there was going to be close to 4,000 to 5,000 people going through that site. I think one of our challenges going forward now is we have more vaccines than people who've signed up. Now the next hard part comes on how we seek out those communities that are still reluctant to get a vaccine. And as we make great progress here in this country, I know all our hearts go out, and we should be reminded that we have not defeated COVID on a worldwide basis. These horrific scenes happening in India, and we have a very large Indian American population in Virginia. As co-chair of the India Caucus, I hear from Indian Americans all across the country, and I'm proud to see that President Biden is not only offering additional vaccines to India, but that critically important oxygen and other materials to get to India as quickly as possible. But those images in India or in Brazil, or even the fact that Canada is a bit behind on vaccination, shows that while we see light at the end of the tunnel, we all need to continue to be vigilant. And if you've not had a vaccination, go out and get that vaccine. The three topics I want to cover at the top. First is some bipartisan, bicameral legislation that I've introduced last week about investing in the American worker. As we look back at the last 14 months, where Congress has put close to $5 trillion into our economy, that's both in terms of enhanced unemployment benefits, direct checks to Americans, helping small businesses, assistance for the Commonwealth and our local communities, all quite good. One area, honestly, that we probably did not do enough, and that is investment in workforce training, because part of the changes that have been brought about by COVID has been a lot of jobs are going to have disappeared and are not coming back. We don't know the exact number, some of that particularly in the service sector of the economy, hotel, restaurant, commercial real estate. Some of those jobs are just not coming back. And unfortunately, our current tax accounting and reporting system really provides no incentive for any business to invest in human capital. It is much more favorable if a company invests in a piece of hardware, a robot or a computer. You make those investments, you get a tax credit, an R&D tax credit. The investment in that hard asset is booked on your financials as an asset investment. What my legislation does, and again, bipartisan and bicameral, is to create the equivalent of a human capital R&D tax credit. So those businesses that will invest in upskilling their workers will get the same tax benefit as if they had bought a computer or bought a robot. And I'm also actively working now with the accounting community to see if we could actually create an asset class around investment in human capital. Every business I know talks about that their workforce is their most important asset. We ought to make sure that our tax accounting and reporting system reflects that kind of investment, and that we put those kind of incentives in place. So hopefully more to come on that question around workforce training. And again, we know the president's in Hampton Roads today looking at these kind of training programs around HVAC at a community college, I think Tidewater Community College down in Hampton Roads, either Tidewater or Thomas Nelson. I'm not sure which one of those that he's visiting, but really important around human capital investment. Second, is as the president lays out his plans for infrastructure, and this is a topic that I'm very familiar with, back to my days as governor, where we made some progress, but I also suffered major defeats, both in Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia, when we tried to do a transportation sales tax referendum for further investment at the Commonwealth level. I think there is broad-based support for further infrastructure investment, whether it be road, bridge, climate infrastructure, broadband. One of the tools that we need to bring to bear is long-term financing. We in Virginia have used financing vehicles in the past. Oftentimes these take the form of toll roads or other systems. But what we've not had, and we're the only major industrial nation in the world not to have a long-term, in a sense, national infrastructure bank, where we can take advantage of the low interest rates and long-term capital, 30-year or 40-year debt, to create an additional financing source for infrastructure. So I've had legislation literally for the last 8 or 9 years that has a bipartisan infrastructure financing authority. This type of authority where with a one-time appropriation of $10 billion, we could leverage that into $300 billion of infrastructure investing. Along with my partner, Senator Roy Blunt, we've put forward this idea again, this ability to have a financing vehicle as part of the broadband package may be one way for us to bridge the gap between some of the dollars my Republican colleagues are talking about and some of the goals that President Biden has. So I really think this infrastructure financing authority will be very much a critical part of the ongoing discussions, bipartisan discussions about how we meet our nation's infrastructure needs in a once-in-a-generation time. And then finally, I want to raise the issue of something I've been working on literally again since my time as governor, and even preceding that with my background in telecommunications. And that is, how do we make sure that every Virginia home has access to high-speed internet connectivity, what we call broadband? We know that broadband in 2021 is an economic necessity, not a nice to have. I was able to secure in the last piece of legislation $17 billion for broadband deployment, some of that through the traditional programs, $10 billion of which in a new program from Treasury. That program will translate to about $220 million for Virginia for broadband. We've also put $4 billion directly to the Commonwealth, $3 billion to our local governments. Much of those dollars can also be used for broadband. And now we have across Virginia a variety of new providers. We've got Elon Musk with a satellite-based system that's being deployed in Wise County. We have a number of our rural electric cooperatives who are very actively going into the broadband deployment business, where they have access to the home. They can be a great partner to provide that last mile access. We have Dominion and other utilities providing middle mile. So my goal, and I want to commend Governor Northam, working very closely with Governor Northam, is to see if we could get every Virginia community to have in place, my hope by the ends of the summer, a broadband deployment plan that will allow us to get north of 95% coverage to all Virginia homes over the next couple of years. This is something that is critically important in terms of delivery of health care on telehealth. It's important in terms of educational ability, and we do need to get kids back in school, but even when they're back in school, having that broadband to the home in terms of being able to study and do homework is critically important. And obviously, as we particularly think about rural Virginia, if we're going to have communities compete for 21st century jobs, you've got to have broadband, not just to the business location, but to homes. So I think you're going to be hearing from the governor and me and others some very exciting new announcements about broadband across the Commonwealth in the coming weeks. So with those as the top lines, investment in worker training, in the ability to bring a financing vehicle to the infrastructure debate, and hopefully a little tease here on some future announcements on broadband. I'll start with that as my outline, and now I'll turn it over to you, Val, and happy to take your questions.
Okay, the first question is from Mitchell Miller at WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Good to talk to you. Thanks
Hey,
again for doing this. You have worked with Republican senators on various issues, and as early talks on infrastructure begin, what are your thoughts about the possibility of bipartisan agreement on the president's plan? Also, do you think it may need to be broken up into different parts or to explore things like you mentioned, the financing authority?
Well, Mitchell, I think if we can get a bipartisan solution, it's always better. And the reason is not simply because it doesn't mean that the substance is better, but it does mean both sides then have to take ownership in whatever solution we put forward. Because, one of the secrets that I think most folks, you realize, and I think members of Congress realize, but Congress never gets it completely right the first time, particularly when you put forward a major initiative. We've seen that with health care. We've seen it with financial reform. We saw it with the Republican tax cut of 2017. If you have both parties investing in the solution, both parties then have to be invested as well in coming up with the fixes where you can try to correct the program. If not, you end up with one side simply throwing arrows at the other team. On on infrastructure, there's a lot of common interest. And I am open to breaking this into a variety of projects, or maybe two tranches. But what I also want to see from my Republican colleagues is not only a willingness to say, yes, we need more roads, bridges, broadband, water and sewer systems, but they've also got to be willing to come forward with how we pay for it. And these negotiations, of which I'm part of, are still at the front end. I do think the ability to bring to the table a creative approach like the Infrastructure Financing Authority or the Infrastructure Bank, and they both function in a sense the same way, could be a way to bridge the gap, because that ability to, again, as this has been validated in our earlier versions of this, if you could put up a one-time $10 billion federal investment, and that could be leveraged into $300 billion of lending, and the reason, since it's lending, it has to be paid back, so that replenishes that backstop of the initial federal appropriation, that may be one of the ways that we bridge the gap where we can talk about a more projects getting done, but in a way that is actually financeable. Again, financing still means you've got to pay it off. It means it's not for free, but it is a tool that other nations have used, and it's remarkable to me that while we have some one-off programs like TIFIA, and while Virginia's been probably more active than virtually any other state on public-private partnerships, not to have that tool in the toolkit when we've got record low interest rates and the ability to get 30-year plus money out there, it would be, from plain financial standpoint, not to have that tool, we would be almost derelict if we didn't include some component of this in the infrastructure plan.
Okay, and before we move on to the next question, I just want to remind everyone to please mute your devices. Up next, we have Mike Gooding with WVEC.
Hi there, Senator. Quick question for you about Senator Gillibrand's bill on military sexual assault. In the past, the Pentagon has been pretty resistant to the idea of taking the investigations and prosecutions out of the hands of unit commanders. But now Secretary Austin is taking it under advisement for 90 days, and then meantime, you all have a bill that would also take it out of the hands of commanders. Tell me why you think this is so important.
Well, Mike, as you know, throughout the last 10 years, I've not supported Senator Gillibrand's approach. And we've seen, literally close to 100 reforms try to be implemented. Unfortunately, those reforms have not driven down in any meaningful way the level of sexual harassment and sexual abuse that takes place in the military. And as I continue to re-review this issue, when I continue to hear about current and former members of our military tell their stories of sexual harassment, and look at the fact that so many other nations, so many other of our allies have gone ahead and taken the chain of command out of this decision, left it to the military justice system to make those decisions about whether you charge someone. I've come to the conclusion that clearly the status quo is not working. Other nations have successfully implemented a system of justice around sexual harassment that seems to have a better outcome. I've given the Pentagon the benefit of the doubt for a decade, and I think it's time to try something different. And I think it's very appropriate that it seems like Secretary Austin is, at least appears to be leaning in that same direction. He's going through a 90-day review. I think we're about 40 days into that, so we've not had his final conclusions. But I think you're seeing, Mike, Senator Gillibrand, who's been relentless on this issue, but I think she's picking up a lot more support because status quo is not working. We've got to try something different. Other nations have shown that you've not weakened a unit's cohesion by taking this decision away from the chain of the command, instead moving it to the military justice system, to a military prosecutor to bring those charges. So I'm ready to try it.
Up next, we have Amy Knowles from the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. Mine is about the Joint Consolidation Loan Separation Act. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what sparked your interest in this issue, how you hope this act will help solve the problem, and why 2021 is the right time to bring light to this situation.
Well, Amy, thanks for the question. And again, this many on the line may not even be fully familiar with this. Many partners have, in a sense, joint consolidation of their debts. And one of the areas where that joint consolidation took place was around student debt. And that the circumstances, although the ability to consolidate your debt in a single source, a couple with kind of joint coverage, that ability ended in 2006. So, there's been some correction, but there are still many couples, and I've heard this from constituents, where somebody was in a relationship. They may be a victim of abuse. They've left that relationship because they've been abused. And it may be years later, but they're still responsible for paying for their former partner's student debt. That makes no sense. It's not fair. It often means the abused partner is left not only being an abuse victim, but being a financial victim of their abuser. And this common sense, broadly bipartisan legislation simply says you have the right to not only sever that relationship in any legal sense, but you also have the right to sever that in terms of your responsibility to pay off your former partner's student debt obligations. This is long overdue. We tried it. It really came to my attention a couple of years ago. I really think this is the year that it can be probably included in one of these larger packages that is going through. It's long overdue, frankly, for this to get done. No one, particularly no one who's been the victim of an abusive relationship, should be then stuck with the financial obligations of their former partner's student debt. I think everybody gets that, and again, I'm very optimistic that this will, this common sense, bipartisan, bicameral piece of legislation will get passed this year.
The next question, The next question comes from Tom Fitzgerald at Fox 5 News.
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Senator, thanks for taking the call. The question about hiring. Obviously, a big goal of the president's plans is to get Americans back to work. But we have this odd dynamic going on here in the DMV where we're hearing a lot of anecdotal reports from small business owners that they're having a lot of trouble hiring employees right now. Some of the owners are pointing to the federal unemployment benefits. We know some states in the DMV are now requiring proof that people are looking for work. As you move forward with any future plans, does the federal government have a role in ensuring that unemployment benefits for those who need it are there, but it does not become an alternative to work?
Yeah, Tom, a great question. And I hear this a lot from restaurant owners who are trying to get reopened and can't get their workers back. And let me give you a bit more complicated answer than you want on this, but I was firmly of the belief that while we needed the enhanced unemployment benefits, those enhanced unemployment benefits, which are now, I believe, at the $400 level, no, $300 level, I'm sorry, on top of what you would normally get from the Commonwealth, ought to have been scaled down as unemployment numbers dropped. It should be, tied to, as it gets easier to get a job, it should be, the amount of additional benefits should tailor down. We were unable to do that, not because there wasn't actually bipartisan agreement. We were unable to do it because our computer systems at the federal level and the state level are so antiquated that we couldn't scale the system. And one of the things that I think we missed in the last COVID relief package was a more meaningful investment in the plain old hardware so that these systems like unemployment can be modulated to more reflect the time that what's happening in the economy, number one. Number two, unless there is a dramatic upsurge or some other cataclysmic economic event, I believe the enhanced unemployment benefits will come to an end in that first week in September. And so I think, folks who are out on unemployment, I think particularly as we get into the summer, their ability to kind of stay out of work, I think that will decrease. And I do think there are tools we need to make sure that, that people are actively seeking work and are not turning down inappropriately work offers. And I do think I hear these stories, but I've yet to be able to see kind of scientific data that shows that this is as I know it's out there on a one-off basis. I wish we could get some more comprehensive data, but I believe it because I've heard it from so many folks. I also think we need to acknowledge that, particularly in the service sector, a number of these jobs may not be coming back. And a number of, for example, let's stay with restaurants for a moment. We've put out $29 additional billion for restaurants. Literally, the restaurants funding goes live today. A lot of restaurants have been holding on. I want all these restaurants to come back, but some of them will probably not come back. And that goes back to my earlier comments at the top. I don't know how many of these jobs are permanently going to have disappeared, but it will be millions, if not tens of millions of jobs that will not be coming back post-COVID. So our country really needs to look at how we get the incentives aligned, the tax incentives, the accounting incentives, if you're a public company, the public company reporting incentives to make sure that we invest in getting these workers the skills they need, because the skills they may have had pre-COVID may not be the skills you need post-COVID. I come back again to an area that near and dear to my heart as chairman of the Intelligence Committee. We've still got north of 40,000 unfilled cybersecurity jobs in the Commonwealth of Virginia, well-paying jobs. Over half of those jobs don't require a 4-year degree. So how do we redirect people into those job opportunities? One of the areas, again, that we also know that we saw through COVID where there's going to be increased need for workforce is caring for our parents and our kids. And one of the things I'm still reviewing from President Biden, but how we make those caregiver jobs both better paying and, frankly, a higher quality job, because that kind of work cannot be outsourced. It's not going to be replaced by technology. And candidly, we don't treat those jobs with the appropriate respect that they should be due. So, yes, we need to realize that the enhanced unemployment needs to tail off. We need to upgrade our technology so we could have a better dial in any future economic catastrophe. Two, we need to make sure that we encourage people to get back out into the workforce as quickly as possible. But we also need to acknowledge that there's a lot of jobs that will not, in their previous pre-COVID form, reappear, and we really need this training. And again, I come back to my legislation that would create the equivalent of a worker training tax credit similar to the R&D tax credit that would incent that business to take that person that might have been a server before in a restaurant and provide that individual with the kind of training for whatever job that might be needed going forward, whether it be cyber, whether it be caregiving, or a host of other areas where I think you're going to see job growth.
The next question comes from Megan Flynn at the Washington Post.
Hey, well, thanks, Senator, for taking my questions. I got a two-part question for you on PRO-ACT stuff. I know there's been some local labor rights groups in Alexandria that have been lobbying to support the PRO-ACT. I'm curious if you've been eating or enjoying any of the cakes that they've brought you. And secondly, on a more serious note, I was just hoping to expand on one of the points of contention that you have with the PRO-ACT. Why do you view it as potentially problematic for gig workers to be reclassified as employees under the PRO-ACT and able to be covered by unions? Why is that kind of a deal breaker for you?
Megan, I'm proud of my record in support of workers. I'm proud of the fact that I stepped up and supported the $15 minimum wage. I'm proud of the fact that over the last couple of years, I've worked with my friends in organized labor and had a virtually perfect voting record with them. And the PRO-ACT is a combination of a dozen plus pieces of legislation, the vast majority of which I support. I support the right of workers to organize. I believe that the balance between workers and management tilts way too much to management right now, and that was exacerbated under 4 years of Donald Trump, where the National Labor Relations Board was totally, I think, biased against worker rights. So there's a lot to like in the PRO-ACT, and but what I want to get to is how can we make some of the areas where I'd like to see some corrections so that this very expansive piece of legislation could be supported on the floor. And one area that I know I've sent you, Megan, all my background. This is an area that I've been focused on literally for the last 6 years, and that's the changing nature of work. We had an economy in the 20th century where people would go to work, oftentimes for a long time. My dad worked for the same company for 36 years, never made a lot of money, but with that work came a whole series of benefits: healthcare, retirement, unemployment, disability. That notion of long-term permanent work with a single firm is fundamentally changing. I think about my kids who are in their 20s and early 30s. They're all going to have a variety of jobs. Many of them want a variety of jobs and variety of gigs. They want the flexibility of whether it's driving Uber part-time, running out their apartment Airbnb, being a part-time IT consultant, maybe working in a restaurant as well, having a series of revenue sources all at the same time. What I have promoted is what I think is a fairly dramatic change in our social safety net that says no matter what kind of work you do, starting with that first hour of work, there ought to be benefits attached. And my fear is that parts of the PRO-ACT tries to fit all work into kind of a 20th century classic W-2 employment status. I think there ought to be a way where we can provide benefits, provide flexibility. I still think there is a role for labor organizations to help manage these benefits, particularly for somebody who's got a variety of revenue sources coming in that meets workers where they're at in 2021, doesn't think we're going to return to a 1980s kind of economy. And the interesting thing, even within the labor movement, there are organizations like the Freelancers Union, like the National Domestic Workers Alliance that I've been working with very closely that believe that this portable benefit approach ought to be part of the new social contract. And I look forward to working with them and members of traditional organized labor to get to a spot that will allow me to support all the other good things that are in the PRO Act, but also has a forward-leaning view in terms of what work looks like in the 21st century. I do not think we're going to go back to the world where everyone works, in a classic 40-hour-a-week, full-time job, long-term employment. I just think that the nature of the world, the nature of technology, the nature of globalization has changed things, and we need to have a social contract and a set of benefits that meets workers where they are today, not where they were in the 1980s.
Okay, and the last question is from Michael Martz at the RTD.
Hey, Michael.
Hi, Senator. How are you? Everyone's looking for, Virginia is looking for guidance from the Treasury Department on the American Rescue Plan Act money. Do you have any idea where that guidance is? Because there's some confusion about how much money is going directly to each locality. There's,
Michael, I mean, that just, again, you guys who've known me for a long time know I could nerd out on this way too long for this session. And, and we have, as you know, Michael, a especially unique circumstance, our Virginia-only system of independent cities really has proven problematic. And in terms of getting that kind of information. I am putting as much pressure on Treasury as possible to make sure that we can get this guidance out both for local governments and for the Commonwealth and for the host of other problems. I talk about the $220 million that we've estimated for broadband coming out from this bill. We need to nail that down so that the governor and the legislature then can meet in special session at some point this summer and have those funds deployed in an appropriate way, because this is I'm not sure these localities, and for that matter the Commonwealth, will ever see as much one-time money as they're going to see coming out of the American Rescue Plan. So making sure they spend it well, making sure what I'm encouraged, spending it for things that are long-term like broadband is really important. And you've got this tension because whether you think about things like rental assistance program, which we started in the December bill, but was a brand new program. There had only been a very tiny program before. Some of the food assistance programs. This broadband initiative is brand new. The volume of dollars that are going to local governments, again, is unprecedented. So there's this tension about getting the dollars out, but getting it out in a way that minimizes abuse and misuse. I'm hearing this, Michael, every day from both my friends at the state and my friends at local government. And one of my goals this week is to try to, frankly, this was independent of your question, was to try to get with more specificity some of the timelines. I mean, I'll give you one other example. I'm very proud of the fact that in the December bill, I was able to secure $12 billion for community development financial institutions, CDFIs that lend to low-income communities. We lost 440,000 black banks, 440,000 black-owned businesses in 2020. We've got to make sure that we help these institutions that lend to minority businesses. Well, standing up a program that was going to invest what's called Tier 1 equity into these institutions, really a great idea. But boy, figuring it out, those institutions have asked, for example, for an extension. We've given them another 60 days before Treasury tries to get this program set up and structured the right way. We also have the problem that since the transition, since the Trump administration was so reluctant to let the Biden folks even in before January 20th, they're running behind on getting all their people in. And this is a problem. This is a problem that we need to get these dollars out, but it has to be done with the appropriate oversight. And I'm not fully begging off, other than the fact that one of my goals this week with Congress on a break is to try to go program by program with the administration and get greater clarity, frankly, whether it's for local government, the Commonwealth, or all of these respective programs that were set up. That's a long answer, and happy to check back in with Val or Rachel at the end of the week, but I'm getting asked this question literally on a daily basis, and I've got sympathy for the administration, but we got to, Virginia's got to make its decisions. Our legislature's got to make these decisions. The governor's got to make these decisions. There are people that are waiting. Again, I point at the restaurants money. It's just being made available today, and the bill was passed in March. Or the shuttered venues, that's been delayed a couple of times. When you do this many bold new things at one moment in time, basically the bureaucracy's been stretched. So the short answer is I'll get you a better answer by Friday. Is that fair?
Yeah, but one question on broadband is the $220 million. Is that just for the state to allocate, or is that shared between the state and locality? What was your intent?
Michael, that $220 million will go from the state down to the localities. The other point that I've made is that and this again gets a bit complicated, but I've had really good conversations with the governor and his team about this, is that the money that goes to the localities, some of it comes, frankly, should be coming this month. Some of it is coming in 2022. The money that comes in 2022 can be used for broadband. So is there a way that the state could help through some of its financing tools, in a sense, advance against that 2022 money, so that if a locality wanted to go ahead and start building out broadband, or signing a contract this summer? Because my concern is, I know that the administration and others are talking about an additional broadband funding source in the infrastructure bill, and you could have almost a glut in the system come fall. And I'd love to see Virginia be the first state where virtually every locality gets out in front of making sure you get this broadband in a timely way. And there are some great, great stories. I mean, I was with one of the Board of Supervisor members from Louisa County. Louisa County put up $15 million of its own county money, and this is before they knew any of this federal money was coming, to work with their Central Virginia Electric Co-op and trying to make sure that, I think they get like north of 99% coverage. I want to make sure that we present these models to other local governments and they know both the options that are out there and the tools that are out there, because boy, oh boy, if we could get that kind of 95% plus coverage across all of Virginia, what that would do both in terms of benefit for Virginians, but also ability to market the Commonwealth and every locality as a great location for business and studies, and that would really give us a leg up. And we've got to get those dollars out. So the $220 million, which is a subset of the $10 billion that was the broadband deployment. I know a lot of numbers here. Will go from state down to these local and regional projects, and it's so much different today than even it was 18 months ago in terms of options on how you get that last mile built. There's just a whole lot better options, and boy, oh boy, there's a much greater recognition. Again, I think I probably hear about broadband from local governments more than any single issue at this moment.
Thank you.
Okay, and that is all the time we have for questions today.
Well, thanks everybody, and again, we'll be happy to share if you want more details on like the investment, the R&D worker tax credit, or the the infrastructure financing tool. Obviously, we got more on the broadband issue as well. But thanks so much for tuning in.